Anti-Semitic hate crime is at its highest in 5 years after a spike last month saw more than 130 incidents reported. The mayor of Tower Hamlets was criticised by Jewish and other groups this week after raising the Palestinian flag over the town hall as a humanitarian gesture of solidarity with the victims of the Gaza crisis, according to him. The chair of the all-party parliamentary group against anti-Semitism has announced a parliamentary report into what's behind the rise. Last week, I spoke to Anas Al-Takriti, responding to news that anti-Semitism is on the rise, and this is what he told me.
There is a rise in Islamophobia as well. There are several think tanks in London as well as across Europe that tell of the rise of Islamophobia. I don't think that we should really, link what's happening in Israel and in Gaza and the conflict over there with any kind of indication of a rise of anti-Semitism or the such. I think that yesterday's march, for instance, it was quite clear. Everyone made it absolutely clear that what we wanted was for people to live in peace.
That was Anas Al-Takriti speaking to me last week. Now, the Labour MP John Mann wants the government to understand what lessons can be learned from the increase in anti-Jewish violence in the light of the Middle East conflict. On the line to discuss this is Danny Stone, who's the director of the PCAA Foundation. Danny, thank you very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
First of all, PCAA, what is it?
So we're a charity. We seek public policy solutions to anti-Semitism and racism, and we're centred around the fact that the struggle against prejudice shouldn't be just the fight of the victims, but there's a responsibility of all. And as part of that role, I'm also the secretary to the all-party parliamentary group against anti-Semitism.
So what have been your findings with regards to the rise of anti-Semitism in this country?
Well, firstly, I think it's important to qualify that Britain has some of the best race relations laws in the world, and we are one of the leading countries in the fight against anti-Semitism, and partly thanks to the MPs that are doing the work as part of this all-party group on anti-Semitism. What is clear is that there has been a steady rise in anti-Semitism over the past decade or more, and that obviously whenever there's a peak in conflict in the Middle East, so there's a spike in conflict in the Middle East, there is an increase in incidents, as we've seen over the past few weeks, with more than 130 incidents, which is nearly double, is double and nearly 3 times the expected monthly incident level.
And what forms do these I suppose, hate crimes is what you would call them, take?
Well, I suppose if there is a silver lining in the recent weeks, certainly, it's been that it hasn't been, or there have been less violent attacks, but it's certainly been verbal abuse, hate mail, almost a quarter of it on social media. If you're looking for examples, a rabbi in North London was verbally abused by some youths shouting, F the Jews. Hitler was right was trending worldwide on Twitter. We've had bricks through the windows of the synagogue in Belfast. Baby murderers were shouted at Jews at a synagogue in Liverpool. A visibly Jewish boy in North London had a stone thrown at his head. So, it ranges in terms of the incidents, but there's just a few examples. And
we know that there are probably more vitriolic responses to Jewish people in other countries in Europe, and I know that this is something you're looking into. What do you put the rise down to in those countries?
Well, I suppose every country has a different population. There'll be different strengths of feelings from that population about in particular in this case in the Middle East. And in some countries, they don't have, as I say, the same kind of the laws or the right policy frameworks necessarily. So, for example, in the UK, the police are very good at recording and publishing the incidents as relates to anti-Semitism. They work alongside the Community Security Trust, a Jewish organisation which seeks to protect and defend the Jewish community. So we've got, great interaction between police and in this case, a Jewish NGO, and we've got the right policy frameworks. In other countries, it may be that they don't have that, and we know that's the case in Europe. In some cases, they aren't recording incidents or reporting incidents, and they don't have the right frameworks in place. And it's that kind of thing that can mean that there aren't the right protections in place, and so the violence or the level of violence and intimidation is much worse.
And do you have any insight into whether there's a rise in Islamophobia?
I mean, my general feeling is that there probably is. It's important to say that most of the work that we've done together with the all-party group on anti-Semitism, whilst obviously we look at anti-Semitism and benefits of the work that we've done have been to all communities. So when we looked at, the security of Jewish schools the security of Jewish schools in the public sector, we also looked at the terrorism, the potential threats from terrorism to other minority communities. When we looked at electoral conduct, we weren't just looking at anti-Semitism in electoral conduct, we were looking at racism and Islamophobia. And that's, I suppose, part of the benefit of the work that we do, where we find ways to try and improve the measures that can be taken against anti-Semitism. It happens to be that is generally a measure that will improve the work against all kinds of hate crime.
I'm interested in your thoughts as the PCAA Foundation about the events in Tower Hamlets, which I mentioned earlier on, the raising of the Palestinian flag over the town hall. I mean, was that slightly incendiary? I mean, what were your thoughts?
I mean, what we try and be very careful not to do, both with ourselves and the all-party group, is to involve ourselves in the kind of the political dimensions of the Israeli-Palestine conflict. What it's better to do, and what I find is more straightforward and sensible to do, is to look at where the line is crossed into anti-Semitism. So when Hitler was right trends worldwide on Twitter, that's a pretty clear indication. And so far as we're concerned, when there are comparisons with Nazi Germany, or one abuses the memory of the Holocaust, that we consider to be anti-Semitic. Someone wants to raise a flag or not, well, I suppose that's part of the political discussion, but we're more concerned with the anti-Semitism that arises from the conflict. I would say, though, that there is a responsibility for politicians to try and moderate the debate. And you mentioned this report that John Mann, MP, is commissioned. Yeah. Well, part of that is to look at how can government and politicians take the public through a kind of an ongoing conflict, trying to help them to express, absolutely, fair kind of feelings and anger without turning that into an attack on the Jewish or on any other community. And that's the important thing, is kind of politicians moderating the debate.
I mean, I suppose there's a broader question around whether putting up a flag like that, or any other flag that might, some people might consider incendiary, whether it puts Jewish people in Tower Hamlets at risk.
Well, I mean, I suppose, again, the thing is that putting a flag is a political discussion. The councillors and others will have views on that, and it's right that they should discuss it. I presume they'll want to discuss, if they're doing it for one flag, should they do it for others, and what have you. Obviously, I would say that if a Jewish person is concerned about that, then there is something important for the council to do, to look at how they can support communities that they think might be affected. I don't think, as it happens, my personal view is I don't think that raising a Palestinian flag is some kind of anti-Semitism. But, as I said, politicians trying to moderate the debate, not trying to polarize things, is important. So if an act is going to be seen as polarizing, then having the right systems in place to try and help the community that will feel kind of alienated or marginalized by that is important.
Danny Stone, Director of PCAA Foundation, thanks very much for joining us this morning.